For our fourth paper, I'd like to introduce Caterina Bori, who is Associate Professor in the Department of History and Classics at Classical Studies, Cultural Studies, at the University of Bologna in Italy. And her title is Defending the Right to Acknowledge Ibn Taymiyya, Shaykh al-Islām, Ibn Nāṣir al-Dīn, al-Dimashqī's al-Radd, al-Wāfir, and its concerns.
Thank you. So what I'm going to present today is very much work in progress, and it's part of a bigger project that aims at locating early modern Taymiyyan legacies and trans-regional spaces of reception. I would be very grateful for any comments, any help in sharpening the argument. So we now move a little bit later. We are still in Damascus, where in 835 a violent dispute flared up. The famous Hanbali polemicist Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Taymiyya was at the center of it, except that this time he was dead. The dispute involved the renowned Shafi hadith expert Ibn Nāṣir al-Din al-Dimashqī and the Hanafi Maturidi scholar al-Adin al-Bukhari, a pupil of Sa'ad al-Din al-Taftazani, well known for his virulent attack against Sufi monist Ibn al-Arabi. A rather peculiar character, al-Adin al-Bukhari, is mentioned in chronicles and biographical dictionaries as one who had a stand by the military and political elite. He resided in India for some time, then moved to Cairo, where he's described as devoted to implementing al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and one who strove for the cause of God, al-Qiyam bi-Dhat Allah, which says something about this character. Actually, he was a very, very polemical person. As for Ibn Nāṣir al-Din, he was a distinguished Shafi hadith scholar. He taught at the Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya in Damascus and wrote much on traditions. I need to do more work on what he wrote, but anyway. As-Sakhawi describes him mostly as a learned and quiet man, certainly the most authoritative Damascene expert in the field of prophetic traditions of the time. We are well informed about the circumstances of the clash between the two. In the year 835, after al-Adin al-Bukhari had moved to Damascus, quote, he inquired, I'm quoting from As-Sakhawi, he inquired about the opinions of Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyya, in which he had isolated himself, and responded to what manifestly appeared to him as mistakes. End of quote. We are told that Ibn Taymiyya got on al-Bukhari's nerves to the point that he proclaimed him an innovator, then an unbeliever. Following this, quote, he started declaring in his teaching sessions that whoever designated Ibn Taymiyya as Shaykh al-Islām, this person was an unbeliever on the account of this very designation. Unfortunately, no mention is made of what exactly disturbed al-Bukhari, and it is something I haven't been able to solve so far. Ibn Nāṣir al-Din stood up in defense of Ibn Taymiyya by collecting evidence that many scholars had actually applied the title of Shaykh al-Islām to Ibn Taymiyya, to the point that it would have been nonsense to consider them all unbelievers. Ibn Nāṣir al-Din's book was titled al-Radd al-Wāfir ala man za'ama anna man samma Ibn Taymiyya Shaykh al-Islām kafir. A copy of the book was sent to Cairo. This is not irrelevant, for as mentioned above, al-Bukhari seemed to have particularly influential there. In the Egyptian capital, al-Radd al-Wāfir was met with a high degree of consensus, and a number of prominent scholars wrote taqaris in its support. These statements are fortunately preserved. They were appended to some of the manuscripts of al-Radd and have been edited by Zuhair al-Shawish with the book. On his part, Alauddin al-Bukhari wrote a pamphlet denigrating Ibn Nāṣir al-Din and the Hanbalis. This pamphlet was sent to the Sultan, but not much happened after that. According to As-Sakhawi, al-Bukhari did not accomplish his goal, but As-Sakhawi does not tell us what Ibn Nāṣir al-Din al-Bukhari's goal was. I assume that it was bringing Ibn Nāṣir al-Din in front of the Sultan or of one of the Qadis. And the case was put to an end. Éric Geoffroy identified the pamphlet as Al-Maljama lil-Mujassima, the brighter to the anthropomorphist, but I could not find enough evidence to embrace and support this view. For some reason, Perhaps because considered only as a plain gathering of biographical notes, al-Radd al-Wāfir of Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn has gone almost unnoticed in modern secular literature. The present paper takes al-Radd al-Wāfir as its starting point and attempts at answering three questions. What were the specific concerns of Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn al-Dimashqī in al-Radd al-Wāfir? Who and what was this text defending? And what does this text tell us about Ibn Taymiyya's legacy 1 century after his death? My tentative argument is that Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn was perhaps not so much defending Ibn Taymiyya, but in rejecting as nonsense the charge of unbelief for whoever acknowledged Ibn Taymiyya as a Shaykh al-Islām, he was defending his own academic freedom as much as that of his fellow scholars. But in order to see things this way, we need to give a look at the al-Radd al-Wāfir and its context. So, the refutation. Al-Radd al-Wāfir can be divided into 3 parts, which correspond to a neat subject division within the text. There is an introduction that precedes and motivates the collection of the evidence. Then there is, of course, the evidence, which is in turn followed by some certificates of auditions, the above mentioned taqaris, and 2 fatwas on the status of Ibn Taymiyya. 2 issues are at stake in the first part of the book, that of takfir and that of defining what was a sheikh, who was a sheikh, what and who was a Shaykh al-Islām. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn is clearly concerned by the easy use of takfir that, as a matter of fact, characterized the scholarly arena of his time. The affair of al-Bukhari itself and other episodes reported by contemporary and later sources, the cases of al-Bisati and al-Biqa'i are well known, are good examples of how the charge of unbelief was easily exploited in heated religious debates. In a recent study, Amalia Levanoni identified 60 cases of takfir charges brought in front of qadis and increasingly in front of sultans in the Mamluk period. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn's al-Radd al-Wāfir must be understood, first of all, against this background. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn is well aware of the spread and abuse of takfir, for he writes, quote, "When the ulama from among the wise men decreased, everybody started to follow his own whims and innovated what he liked. This attitude became a religion in whose name whoever disagreed with him was charged with unbelief, and whoever took the distance from him was cursed." His musings on takfir are followed by a discussion of a variety of ways of expressing criticism. First of all, cursing, la'an, that is, quote, removing somebody from God's mercy, end of quote, which is not permitted on specific individuals unless they died as unbelievers, and we must be sure about it by means of a revealed text, such as Iblis or Abu Jahl. Then al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, the science of assessing hadith transmitters, which has nothing to do, Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn writes, with takfir and la'an, for the experts who engaged in it in turn were strictly evaluated and had to fulfill a series of moral and scholarly requirements, lest their criticism be rejected. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn lists the most important critics of transmitters for each generation, and he includes among them Ibn Taymiyya with al-Mizzi and al-Birzali and al-Dhahabi. The background of Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn as a hadith scholar clearly emerges here as throughout the whole book. When criticism is based on hostility, madhab, and envy, it is not a valid criticism. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn let al-Dhahabi have the final word on takfir. Al-Dhahabi mentions how in the history of Islam, both the traditionalist and speculative camps often exaggerated and ended up in accusing each other of innovation or unbelief because of their scholarly fanaticism, to finally conclude, quote, "We seek refuge in God from charging with unbelief a Muslim who professes Tawheed," end of quote. So this is the position that Ibn Nāṣir ad-Dīn endorses, and his premises should be clear by now. 1, a Muslim cannot declare a fellow Muslim an unbeliever. 2, cursing cannot be cast upon specific individuals unless we are sure by means of a revealed text that they died as unbelievers. And 3, critical assessments in the field of hadith studies cannot be motivated by personal reasons or madhab affiliations. At this point, the target of the book is finally made clear. A person who does not have the necessary experience and knowledge to engage into criticism declared that, quote, whoever called Ibn Taymiyya a Shaykh al-Islām is an unbeliever and the prayer behind him is not valid, end of quote. But now the question is, who is a Shaykh al-Islām? And what is this? My skills at PowerPoint are very low. So, Malish, who is a Shaykh al-Islām? Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din offers his own interpretation of this title. Shaykh al-Islām is the person who has aged in Islam and has reached the announced promise in safety, fi salama, his hair grayness, shayba, being like the light of the last day. Or, in the language of the commoners, the Shaykh al-Islām is the wise man who is prepared for the casualties of life and the person in whom people seek protection and refuge. He is the person who has gone along the path of the people of Islam, has safely escaped the evil of youth and ignorance, and now lives according to the Sunnah. For others, Shaykh al-Islām is the one who reached the rank of wilaya and whose blessing people seek. Yet, the meaning intended by experts in the science of al-Jarh wa al-Ta'dil is different, and this is the one that counts. According to them, a Shaykh al-Islām is, and I paraphrase the text, is the scholar who follows the book of God and abides by the Sunnah, who knows the Quran and all the related branches of religious knowledge, who knows the Sunnah and conforms to it, who extracts the principles and derives their furu' from the scriptural sources, who is humble, aware of his own limits, who does not rejoice in being venerated and does not claim immunity from error. The person who fulfills these requisites is a Shaykh al-Islām. Every generation has its own Shuyukh al-Islam, and Ibn Taymiyya is listed among a small group of Hanbalis and Shafi'i experts in the science of al-Jarh wa Ta'dil of Ibn Taymiyya's own generation who deserved this title. And now we come to the evidence. Hopefully we come to the evidence, because, no, we don't come to the evidence, but we come to the evidence anyway, not in the PowerPoint. Anyway, the evidence. Having clarified this, Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din presents his evidence, which consists in presenting attestations of 85 scholars applying the honorific of Shaykh al-Islām to Ibn Taymiyya when talking about him. The evidence takes the form either of excerpts from biographical notices in which the scholar in question qualifies Ibn Taymiyya as a Shaykh al-Islam, or by quoting pieces of auditing sessions in which Ibn Taymiyya appears in different roles, as one of the attending authorities, Musmi', as one of the participants, Sami'in, or as one of the readers. In all cases, Ibn Taymiyya is always introduced by the honorific title of Shaykh al-Islām. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din's favorite sources are either extracts from al-Dhahabi's specialized dictionaries of traditionists or sama'at he had evidently access to. I'm going to quote one example, which I thought I had, I messed around. Anyway, I'm quoting now from the one of the entries, and the guy is Amin ibn al-Wani. Ibn al-Wani, who died in 735, was a mu'adhin and a hadith scholar, and he put together a collection of 40 hadith, which he presented to Ibn Taymiyya. But these 40 hadith were hadith that were transmitted by Ibn Taymiyya on the authority of some of his most important teachers. So under this entry we find, I also found wajadtu, and this is Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din, an audition statement written by the above mentioned Amin ad-Din al-Wani of the collection of Hasan ibn Arafi. It looked Hasan ibn Arafa. It looked like this. The whole of this collection, that is the hadith of Hassan ibn Arafah, was heard under the direction of 22 teachers. Among these, the Imam, and then comes a long list of honorific titles, Shaykh al-Islām, al-Dīn, Ibn Taymiyya, al-Harrani. Then he mentioned the rest of the tabaqa and the participants. So these auditing sessions are described quite in detail. We are told where, when, what, to whom, and through the reading of whom Ibn Taymiyya read, audited, or even authorized the transmission of a certain collection of hadith or of a certain text. The Juza ibn Arafah and Ibn al-Wani's collections of 40 hadith are the most frequently mentioned, but also the Sahih Muslim and an otherwise unspecified selection of 100 traditions. What is really surprising here is Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din's lack of interest in doctrinal issues, which are the unexpected absentee from this text. Just as rarely, the mishaps and misfortunes of Ibn Taymiyya appear in the 85 entries Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din brings together. This is all the more surprising considering that Ala ad-Din al-Bukhari was not the only one at odds with Ibn Taymiyya in the first decades of the 15th century. A number of disorders and local disputes occurred in Damascus in the last 2 decades of the 14th century and involved various scholars expressing their penchant for Ibn Taymiyya on a number of issues, especially the triple divorce question. More, we know of a certain Taqi ad-Din al-Hizni, who died in 829, a Damascene Shafi scholar of strong Ash'ari leanings, who wrote a polemical writing titled دفع الشبح من شبح وتمرد ونسب ذلك إلى السيد الجليل الإمام أحمد. دفع الشبح is a ruthless attack against Ibn Taymiyya and his immediate followers, Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Kathir in particular, on a broad number of theological and legal issues. Following an established rhetorical device, we find this already in As-Subki. In his verbal aggression towards Ibn Taymiyya, al-Hizni describes him in sectarian ways, his aim being that of bringing Ibn Taymiyya into disrepute by detaching him from the larger Hanbali tradition to which he belonged. Although Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din never mentions Taqi ad-Din al-Hizni, we know that the two knew each other, for, as Sakhawi writes, Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din helped Taqi ad-Din al-Hizni in the construction of a Khan al-Sabil, despite the latter's disparagement of Ibn Taymiyya. Daf' al-Shubah and al-Radd al-Wāfir are vivid witnesses to the tense atmosphere of contention that surrounded Ibn Taymiyya's legacy in his hometown roughly 1 century after his death. They are both forceful examples of the kind of violent polarization that affiliation or opposition to Ibn Taymiyya could generate. Yet, given this spirited atmosphere, Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din's disengagement from all contentious issues in his defense of Ibn Taymiyya is all the more astonishing. So let's get back to al-Radd al-Wāfir for a second to then draw some conclusions. Although Ibn Taymiyya's biographical accounts usually emphasize his outstanding knowledge of traditions, they do not usually give relevance to the ordinary encounters Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din mentions throughout his text. Generally, Ibn Taymiyya's biographies highlight the more sensational aspects of his life. On the contrary, in al-Radd al-Wāfir, Ibn Taymiyya is made step out of the extraordinary aura typical of his biographical writing to take part in a rather ordinary urban texture of hadith auditing sessions with all the religious, moral, and intellectual merits attached to it. In other words, by drawing upon a broad corpus of sama'at Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din had evidently access to, he discloses a rather hidden for us so far, a rather hidden world of hadith learning or auditing sessions in which Ibn Taymiyya was quietly and devotionally engaged. So what do we make, or what do I make of all this? I shall try to draw some conclusions and answer my initial questions, which were what were the specific concerns of Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din's al-Radd al-Wāfir, who and what was this text defending, and what does this text tell us about Ibn Taymiyya's legacy 1 century after his death. So question 1 and 2. By removing all contentious issues associated with Ibn Taymiyya, al-Radd al-Wāfir seemed to promote an operation of normalization of Ibn Taymiyya. We learn nothing about his contentious scholarship, and this is all the more striking considering Taqi ad-Din al-Hisni's virulent aggression on Ibn Taymiyya. Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din demonstrates that Ibn Taymiyya morally and intellectually fulfilled the standard of Shaykh al-Islām, which for him had to do with the science of hadith. By doing so, the debate is flattened, sensitive matters are left out, and Ibn Taymiyya's doctrines disregarded without being engaged. The question remains, to me, whether Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din was truly defending Ibn Taymiyya, or rather, whether he was defending the right to acknowledge Ibn Taymiyya as a Shaykh al-Islām, or perhaps the two. In fact, declaring that Ibn Taymiyya was an unbeliever was something, but declaring that all those who recognized Ibn Taymiyya as a Shaykh al-Islām were also unbelievers was a thoroughly different matter. In a scholarly context where takfir was a widespread practice, scholars must have felt the issue was a sensitive one, and that Ala ad-Din al-Bukhari had simply gone too far. This accounts for the fairly large body of taqaris in support of the text. And in fact, most of the authors of the taqaris locate in Ibn Taymiyya a degree of isolation. Nonetheless, they are willing to keep him within the ranks as a talented scholar and a mujtahid. al-Radd al-Wāfir and its taqaris strip Ibn Taymiyya off his most debatable features and dress him up as a reliable hadith scholar, or at the best, as an excusable mujtahid. al-Radd al-Wāfir was to become a rather popular text, mainly in Hanbali's circles. It was read, transmitted, and approved in Syria, Damascus, Aleppo, Hims, Egypt, in Cairo, and also in Trablus in the course of the 15th century. We also have evidence that the al-Radd al-Wāfir circulated in the 16th and 17th centuries. We possess a Sam'a and Ijaza by the famous Hanbali Syrian scholar al-Hijawi, according to which the text was read with al-Kutub al-Sitta in various places in Damascus. In the 17th century, the Egyptian Hanbali scholar Yusuf al-Mar'i put together an abridged calque of al-Radd al-Wāfir, taqaris included, entitled Al-Shahada al-Zakiyya fi Thana' ala Ibn Taymiyya. al-Radd al-Wāfir encouraged a cumulative way of supporting Ibn Taymiyya, which consisted in showing that he was not alone, without really engaging with his own controversial ideas. And much later on, Khairuddin al-Alusi, in his Jala' al-Ahmadain, opens his book in a way that reminded me of al-Radd al-Wāfir, listing a whole bunch of scholars who praised Ibn Taymiyya. And he goes as far as Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din, and then after Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din, there is Ibrahim al-Qurani. And I was wondering what happened between Ibn Nāṣir ad-Din and Ibrahim al-Qurani. Anyway, despite its disengaging attitude, al-Radd al-Wāfir, especially when read together with Dafa Shubah and the incidents which occurred at the end of the 14th century, still show that 1 century after his death, Ibn Taymiyya's contentious legacy had not disappeared from the Damascene scholarly scenes. His contested memory was alive. It created tensions, disorders,